Hello, I'm Rachel Papworth from Green and Tidy.
And I'm Sue from Eating Psychology UK.
I, as you know, help people all over the world to declutter their homes, and over the last couple of weeks I've been working with Sue on her home office. You might have seen some of the other videos on YouTube. And as we've been working, Sue and I have noticed a lot of parallels between the work that I do, helping people declutter, and the work that Sue does around eating. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
So with Eating Psychology, I work with clients who are overeaters and also people who want to change their diet from a junk food diet to a more healthy diet and know what they should be eating but are finding it really hard to stick to those good habits.
Great. So yeah, we've noticed lots of parallels between eating and clutter. So I'm here today working with Sue, and we thought we'd take advantage of this beautiful weather and have a little break and have a wee chat about those parallels.
And I've just found a lovely little quote here that I'd like to read, just to get us off, to start us off. So talking about, so this is from a book called The Spacious Self. So the self that we're talking about is the overwhelmed and sometimes grumpy, fragmented self that has lost the ability to live fully and think about big. The self that is fully padded with all kinds of protections and stuff to ward off the calamities which are certain to come at any moment. The self that feels that there is a simpler way but can't seem to figure out where it is or how to cultivate it. These are the layers that will be melting away. Behind all the padding is a rich and spacious being.
Wow!
Yay!
And what's that book about?
So that's about, it's really about making space within, which then manifests without. So both
it's not
our businesses.
Specifically about eating, that book?
No, not at all. No.
Okay.
So it's so what we're talking about really is making space in all areas of your life. So with me, I'm mostly talking about food and how people are tending to eat at all times during the day. They're, so you're watching the telly, you're snacking. You go to the movies, you start to snack. You're having little snacks throughout the day, and half the time you don't even know you're doing it. It's just, so there's just too much, and then you get too much on your body, and your body starts to have all this padding around it. And so I have a propensity to overeat myself, which is why I love working with people like myself.
Yeah.
But
look, just sorry to interrupt you, because that's the opposite from me. But I am a naturally decluttered and organised person. And that's why I love working with people who are not that way, because I can bring my clarity of thinking and automatic desire to work systematically and love of completion and add that to their mix, and it really works for them. But isn't that interesting how you can support somebody because you come from the same place, or you can support somebody because you come from an opposite angle? I can hear so many, when you read that quote out, and I thought it was a book that was specifically about eating, disordered eating, but I could hear so much in it that was like the same as clutter, the padding that you build up to protect yourself, the overwhelm, the sense of kind of always needing to have more. It's just so many parallels, aren't there?
That's right. And emotional eating, emotional cluttering. So if you're feeling upset, some people might eat chocolate because they're feeling upset.
And other people take retail therapy.
Yeah, they're going to go out and buy a new dress, or several.
And even, I don't think it's even, it's not quite as stark as that. It's not necessarily, I feel miserable, I'm in tears, I know I'll go and buy a new pair of shoes, or I know I'll eat a bar of chocolate. It's a little bit more, it's lower level and more insidious than that. It's a kind of general sort of way of dealing with unease is to shop or to eat.
It's done without really consciously thinking about it. So a lot of my overeaters, it's coming from the, your back part of your brain, your lizard part of the brain is like panicking a little bit. It's a little bit of stress, so stress is only supposed to last about 4 minutes. It's designed for running away from a lion. So the blood comes away from your digestive system, it comes into your limbs ready for fight or flight, So you stop digesting any food you've got in, you leach out your vitamins and minerals. And some people I work with, like nurses or people who are under constant low-level stress, you actually start to see almost malnutrition in these people because they're not holding on to the goodness in their food.
So, and then that links to, because often I think what's driving overconsumption of stuff is this kind of fear of scarcity.
Yes.
So it's this fear of not having enough, fear of needing to build up a store, and that kind of links to that, doesn't it? So it's like if you're continually depleted nourishment-wise, you would have a sense of needing to build up a store to kind of, for those moments. And I think it's the same kind of thing going on.
Absolutely, and I think there's a whole lot of the make, do and mend mentality, if you like. So, wasting food is bad, think of the starving children in the third world, so you should finish what's on your plate. These are often very strong messages from childhood, and, my parents, wartime generation, when I was young, I remember darning socks. Who darns socks now? Because you can just buy them for £2.50 down Primark.
But how wasteful is that? Yeah, one of the reasons why I love decluttering, and why my business is called Green and Tidy, is because I'm very green-minded, and decluttering and organising is such an essential part of living a low-impact life. Because unless you're continually decluttering and organising, it's surprisingly easy to forget what you've got, and then you start buying stuff because you've forgotten you've had it, or because you can't find it in the clutter, or because it's got broken because it was inappropriately stored, so it got knocked off a shelf, or it got crushed by other stuff, or whatever, and deteriorated.
Well, it'd be exactly the same as looking at a cluttered fridge. So you're looking at a fridge full of obesity with stuff in there that you can't even remember what was there.
Yeah, exactly.
So
so that's, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but what I was going to say was the link to waste.
Yes.
So I'm very eco-minded. I tend to attract people who want to work with me who are very eco-minded. And one of the things people really struggle with is they can't bear to get rid of stuff if they don't know it's going to get used somewhere. It feels like a waste to chuck stuff away. The truth is, of course, if it's just living in a cupboard in the house and never getting used, it's already being wasted. Whereas if you get it out into the consumption stream somehow, you can potentially get it back into use. But it's doing no more good sitting in a cupboard than it is in a landfill site or an incinerator, sadly.
Well, that's true. I mean, the Australian Aboriginals have a belief that if you hold on to a thing, an object, for more than a few days, it will turn malign and turn against you. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff about the early white settlers, or actually a bit later on, but giving Aboriginal populations something like a 4-wheel drive, and the Aboriginals would then drive it around for 3 days until it run out of petrol, and then just discard it and walk away from it.
So it's
same with houses.
Their clothing.
Yeah, houses. That's why they don't have houses, because their belief is it will turn malign.
And I mean, I sort of see that, because we have such a propensity to get attached to things. I get attached to a particular breakfast bowl just because I've eaten out of it for the last 5 years. Suddenly it means a lot to me, and if it were to get broken, I'd be upset. As we go through our lives, we just kind of develop these emotional attachments to anything that features in our life regularly.
So when you look at people's food habits, people get very attached to what you can and can't eat for breakfast.
Oh, really?
Yes. Okay. So in the West, quite alone amongst the global population in the West, we've all decided that sugary cereals are what one eats for breakfast. Low-fat products are dreadful things.
Oh, because they're all packed with sugar, aren't
they? Just think, what is that fat being replaced with? You're better off having the fat. Fat is good. Fat is good.
Yeah. So now I'm immediately thinking, are there parallels there about the messages that we're given about stuff? I mean, that's an interesting one, because that was a mistaken bit of health advice. It wasn't just about marketing.
That's right.
But certainly, in terms of acquiring stuff, I mean, there's people who are so at the mercy of the marketing of businesses, and businesses are so good at getting people to buy stuff, and like setting out the shop so that the right thing will catch your eye, and setting out the offer so it feels like you've got to have that now, and you do that buy one get one free when you only actually came out with one item. And so I think it's quite important, if you want to shift things in your life, to really become quite aware. To start looking at what's going on when you make decisions about what you eat, or what you buy, or what you own, or what you need to keep. Just that little bit of awareness, so you take a step back and you're kind of visceral responsive.
If I ever walk into a certain Swedish retail outlet, I always
other Swedish retail outlets.
I always remind myself. So what quite often happens here, I walk out armed with loads of things that I never knew I needed. Okay, so that's not a good thing. That really isn't a good thing.
Because that certain Swedish retailer, I haven't been actually set foot in one in about 20 years, but I believe they did at the time. They make you walk around the whole store to get to everything, don't they?
They do.
You have to pass everything that they sell.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of food, the the food, science is an ongoing conversation. So, every decade science will come out with a different method, and then that's as it should be. But people have adopted science as a religion and think, right, so it's scientifically proven, so this is the 70s speaking, it's scientifically proven that we must all have wheat bran and oat bran in our diets and eat loads of meat because it's good for us.
And I think some of the reason why we all do that, why we take those messages and like, oh, that's how I'm going to live the rest of my life, is we haven't got time to be continually reading all the new science. We want simple formulas. So once we've got, right, I'm going to eat low fat, low salt, low sugar, drink plenty of water. Okay, I don't have to think anymore about all that nutritional science stuff. I can just get on and live my life. We don't want it to keep changing, but the truth is that it does. Yeah.
And not only it keeps changing, but you keep changing. So, in the winter, so in the summer, so we're sitting, it's a glorious sunny day, we're out here in the sun, and your body wants expansive foods, salads, things like that, which we naturally gravitate towards in summer. And also summer is when the fruit ripens. And so there's loads of sugar, there's a big glut of sugar around. And so naturally, as a mammal, we'd be eating that sugary fruit. But come the autumn and winter, that sugary fruit wouldn't be there anymore. The problem now is we live in perpetual summer, because you go into any garage or whatever, it's full of sugar. It's not natural.
So then what I was wondering about is, I wonder if there are seasonal effects on us wanting to acquire stuff.
That's a very good point.
I don't know whether
do we start to go into hibernation, hoarding mode as the winter draws in?
Or do we, when it's summer and we're out, we feel more up, we feel, oh yeah, we're kind of more
spring cleaning.
Open. Yeah, I mean, definitely I notice that my clients, when it gets to spring, they feel much more like decluttering. They want to clean behind. I think the light's brighter, you can see more. Yeah. You kind of feel like changing things.
Yeah.
It's season of rebirth, and that's a definite thing.
Absolutely. And then there's that Scandinavian word, hygge. Is that how you say it? Hygge. That thing, which appears to involve like bringing in lots of comforting stuff like blankets.
I particularly like the implication that it's a Scandinavian where we don't have a translation for it. I think it means cosy, doesn't it?
Yeah, good point. It's sort of making yourself feel all cuddly and cosy, isn't it? And of course people do the same with food. So come the winter, people are looking for stews and soups that have quite a lot of fat in them. People start to want to eat more red meat and so on. And I see some of my clients who are fairly committed vegetarians or even vegans come to me distraught because it's usually coming towards winter and they're suddenly fancying meat, and I say to them, well, your body is asking for meat and contracting foods at this point, do with that information what you will. But, I think sticking to any one dogma, like I am this or I am that, is doing a disservice because your body, there's far more messages coming from your gut up towards your brain than your brain down to your gut. So your gut is telling you what it needs. So some people do well.
So I'm continually listening for the parallels here between clutter and food. But what I can hear there's some kind of dissonance here because what I'm thinking is if a client was saying to me, I have this visceral urge to acquire stuff, and I really want to go and buy stuff, what would I say? I mean, I wouldn't say don't. I'm not into fixed rules around stuff. I think people have got to go with what works for them. But I would be saying, have a little think about it. Like, I'm not saying you must never buy anything ever again. And if I suppose if you really, really want something, I suppose so that is kind of similar. I would be saying, if you're really sure, you really want it, and you're going to love it and honour that thing, acquire it. And get rid of some of the old rubbish that is no longer giving you that kind of soul nourishment to make space for it. I guess that's what I would say. So there is a parallel there.
I think the key word nourishment, I'm really glad you just said soul nourishment, because I think it's really important to understand that nourishment doesn't just come from food.
No.
It comes from stuff, it comes from textures.
And from experience and, and relationships and, it all nurtures your soul, doesn't it?
So quite often when people are hungry, it's actually, they're feeling lonely. It might actually be that you need to phone a friend, not have yet another sandwich.
And absolutely. And I think often when we want to acquire stuff, it's trying to fill a different kind of hole that we haven't identified and we haven't.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to the brain science bit, which I mentioned before about being hijacked by your the back half of your brain, which come forward and go, no, I need to have comforting stuff and blankets and stews and yet more chocolate or whatever it is. So what you have to do is bring it into your prefrontal cortex and say, right, I am now experiencing my desire to eat loads of chocolate or buy loads of rugs or whatever it is. Yeah. Now, as soon as you bring it into language and say it out loud if you can, as soon as you brought it into language, you've already got that into the logical part of your brain. Okay. So you can now start logicking it out. So do I really want to have that chocolate? And the answer might be yes.
Yeah.
And if it's yes, go ahead and have it. But if it's actually, oh no, actually, do you know, I don't really. I've got this sort of brain hijack thing, so I'll just leave it a few minutes.
Yeah.
So it might be the same decision in a shop.
And that, I've got a video on YouTube about that, about how you when you feel that impulse to buy something, like just take a moment, just stop for a second and just think, do I really want to? Ask yourself a few questions like, what am I going to do with it? Where am I going to keep it? Have I already got one of these? How environmentally friendly is it? How will I get rid of it at the end of its life? Those sort of questions. And then at the end of kind of just giving yourself that moment to think, if you still want it, buy it. And ideally maybe get rid of something to make space for it.
That's right.
But just if you have that little moment, it'll maybe stop the acquisition being just instinctual, and it might actually get you to the point where sometimes you think, actually, I don't think that.
Exactly. So I'm just going to tell you a little story about something that happened to me, and then I'm sure you will find it. It's getting a bit versus, isn't it? It's like food versus clutter. Yeah.
Well, I don't think it is. I think I really see they're really linked.
Yeah, they are.
Just so linked.
So a little story about me. So I'm an eating psychology coach, and I also teach yoga. And a couple of months ago, I'd been studying food labelling quite a lot, so that all the things that used to be on the label they've now been reclassified as food processing aids rather than ingredients, so they're not on the label anymore. So I was making sure I was an expert on all this stuff that's in our food. And after several days of deeply studying this, I realised retrospectively that at some level I had frightened myself. Not consciously, but somewhere at the back of my mind was some kind of message like, I can never eat anything ever again because everything's full of rubbish. I can never eat anything in a box or go into a supermarket and buy anything ever, and all I'll ever be able to eat is like kale. So and I was feeling quite upset about this.
I can't imagine why.
Not on a conscious level. So there I was driving along, ready to teach yoga, and this sudden urge I had to have cheese and onion crisps and a Kit Kat. It was so strong, and this doesn't really happen to me. I'm not that type of eater, but it was so strong. I stopped by a little local supermarket, and I went in. I got the crisps and I got the Kit Kat, and before I even knew it, I'd basically eaten both of them just before I was about to teach yoga. And then, in those moments between finishing eating it, parking the car, getting the stuff out of the car, this whole
self-loathing.
God's sake, just about to teach yoga, you're now full of crisps and a Kit Kat, which is not ideal.
Breath smells of cheese.
Not ideal. As I said, I don't even eat that stuff. I don't even like that stuff, and I genuinely don't like that stuff. So what was all that about? And it was only driving home after the yoga that I started to realise, okay, that's what it was. I'd frightened myself. So I'd done this and eaten it. So there you go. Well, no harm done. Doesn't mean I'm going to then eat crisps and chocolate for the rest of my life.
Really
that was just a thing.
Not to beat yourself up. The number of times I say that to people, when people look at their clutter, and for a start they feel really overwhelmed, and then they will tend to go into what a bad person they are and how rubbish they are, and everybody else can run their life and I can't run my life. And what I'm always wanting to get people to is, there's nothing wrong here. There's just some stuff. There's some stuff. There might be more stuff than you want there to be. There might be stuff in different places from where you want it to be. That can be changed. There's nothing wrong. Let's just systematically start and get it the way you want it to be. But you've got to stop beating yourself up, or you're not in an emotional state to deal with it.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important to watch for the messages with which you're labelling yourself. I am the kind of person who. I'm not the person. So you're putting yourself in a box. I am a clutterer. I am an overeater. Okay, in that case, I'll just clutter and overeat because that's what I am.
Yeah, and I think in 2013, hoarding disorder was classified for the first time in the American system. It was quite influenced by that here too. As a mental health condition in its own right. So before that, it had always kind of been seen as a subset of usually OCD, which often it's not related to at all. Sometimes it is.
Yes.
And anyway, so now it's now in the American system, it has this classification in its own right. And I don't have a strong opinion either way, actually, but I do think it's quite interesting to think about what the positives and negatives of that are. The positives, obviously, it focuses resources, it probably enables more resources to be brought into it, it focuses treatment, it reduces stigma, it raises awareness. But on the negative side, apart from the kind of potentially empowering big pharma to throw drugs at it, which may not be the best way to treat it, I think also there's a risk that people, once they've got that label, I suffer from hoarding disorder, they end up being disempowered. So, well, I'm a hoarder, so, you know, I can't clear my house. I'm never going to be able to sort this out because I'm a hoarder. You know, I'm not saying I don't think it should have been classified, but I do think it's interesting to look at the kind of positives and negatives of that.
I agree. You know, as in parallel in the eating psychology world, there's a condition that again has recently received a label called orthorexia.
Oh yes, disordered eating.
Yeah, well, the orthorexia is people who will only eat really healthy stuff.
Right.
And of course, the trouble is, kind of like the story I was telling before, is that you end up being able to eat a decreasing amount of food that you believe is healthy.
Yeah.
You know, so I can't eat that because that's processed food and it might kill me.
Yeah.
So people get further and further down this road, and I think, you know, a lot of people, perhaps in all of us, is that propensity to get over anxious about something. And it's so easy to fall into a dogma and a belief that is unhelpful. So I think it's very much about questioning your beliefs. I don't know if have you ever read the works of Byron Katie?
I haven't read her books, but I think I follow her on Facebook, and I'm kind of aware of some of what
she says. It's constantly questioning your beliefs. You know, you might say all men are, or well, are they? You know, is that true? Is that true?
There was something you said about. I think it was linked to what you were saying about the desire to consume being a kind of displaced healing activity.
Okay, yeah.
And it made me think about. So I am by nature someone who likes to deal with the causes of a problem rather than the symptoms. You know, see, it's pointless to deal with symptoms.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And clutter very clearly is a symptom rather than a cause. You know, clutter, your external clutter is so obviously a manifestation of your internal clutter, like the things you're holding on to that you don't need to hold on to, the disorganisation, the lack of clarity, disempowerment usually around some area of your life.
Yes.
So when I work with people and we start decluttering, I love seeing how it just has knock-on effects on the other areas of their life. They might lose some weight, they might get a new relationship, they might get into a new job, they might decide to move house, they might, like, loads of things change in people's lives. And I mean, in a way it's a no-brainer because a lot of clutter is a result of deferring an action or deferring a decision. So when you start dealing with your clutter, you're forced to deal with all those actions and decisions. So you get moving in all sorts of areas of your life. So I guess it's not surprising. But I love how it's like a gentle way, dealing with your clutter, it's like a gentle way into dealing with the more underlying fundamental things that are not working in your life. Do you see the same thing?
I absolutely do, yes. Because being overweight is a symptom as well.
Yeah.
It's a symptom quite often of overeating. There can be other causes for being overweight as well, but most of the clients I'm dealing with it's overeating, or it's eating the wrong things, like junk foods and things our body just can't cope with, or it's eating under stress. There's all sorts of reasons why that happens, which I won't go into now. But what happens when I'm working with people? So one thing I ask people to do is breathing properly.
Okay.
So when you start to breathe properly and let the breath come right down into your belly, which I often advise people to take 10 deep breaths before they eat, for instance, that they are then able to listen to the messages that are coming up from here. And if you start listening to your gut wisdom, then you hear about what it is that you need to nourish you, which again, I haven't mentioned it before, it might be loneliness, it might be need to phone a friend, it might be, it's often not to do with food. And once you start to really get that wisdom, and it then has knock-on effects in all areas of your life. It's kind of spaciousness that we're looking for. You can get at it physically, mentally, or spiritually.
Yeah.
So even if you haven't got the body wisdom yet, even if you just physically start doing something, which might be physically decluttering, or it might be just physically starting to have more fruit and veg in your diet and getting rid of the processed stuff, or just every time you're about to just overeat, just stopping and saying to yourself, I'm now experiencing my, desire to eat this. Do I really want it? So if you actually intervene at that moment when you're just about to acquire more stuff, whether that's food or physical stuff, then that is then going to affect you spiritually. And then spiritually you'll start to find spaciousness.
That's similar, isn't it? Like a lot of my clients, they literally find that by getting rid of their clutter, they make space for something new to come in. And it can be something tangible, or it can be a new job, or a new relationship. And they tell you without me asking them, they make that leap themselves. They say, I just wanted you to know, I got an email a couple of weeks ago from a client I worked with ages ago, and I just wanted you to know that I continued the decluttering that you trained me in afterwards, and I've kept it up, and I got a new job this week, and I'm absolutely certain it's because I made space by getting rid of this old stuff, a lot of which was to do with previous jobs that she'd held, and it's made space for a new job to come in.
Absolutely. And when I work with people, you know, on their kitchens, some people, and I say, you know, if I'm doing the food education stuff about labelling and what's in foods, and I get people to go through their kitchens and just look at the packets and say, right, what's in this? You know, and if there's just a whole load of chemicals and sugar and this, that, and the other, they say, well, you know, you can either use that up or you just get rid of it. And eventually they'll either use it up and get rid of it, or they'll just get rid of it. And, you know, it's great if they just get rid of it. And then suddenly you've got all the space in your fridge and your cupboards for good stuff going in there that hasn't got rubbish in it. And immediately your diet is transformed.
Yeah. And also, what I think part of what that might be, and again a similar thing happens when I work with people, is the getting real about what your situation is. So we've got it on video on YouTube. When I first started working with you, I got you to talk us around the room. So you took a look at your whole room and kind of got real about what was there. And also we took before and after photos, so that you've got a record of how it was. So when you make a change to it, you can look back and see what the difference is.
Yeah. It's interesting thinking about, you know, so with my stuff it tends to be, I get very enthusiastic at the beginning of things, and then I don't take the last bit of action. I'm not a completer finisher. So, you know, that's...
I think that's really key to clutter. That is so key to clutter, because, as I said just now, like, most clutter is a result of procrastination, basically, not doing something or not making a decision on something. Now, and again, I am naturally a completer finisher. I actually love getting to the end of things. Like, when I'm reading a book, I cannot help myself continually looking and kind of judging, am I 40%, 50%, 50% through the book, and feeling a sense of achievement of getting towards the end. I even have to not look at how many pages there are in a book, because I will be distracted by my brain wanting to work out what proportion of the pages I've read, rather than actually reading the book and enjoying it. So I'm driven to complete things. So and I think that is a really key element of being decluttered, is getting the job done, getting to the end of it, so you can then get rid of the associated thing.
Well, food-wise, just to draw the parallel again, you know, so cookery programs on TV are incredibly popular, as are decluttering programs. Like, but you know, the amount of people who watch MasterChef or Come Dine With Me, which I was on, Come Dine With Me, which I won, cooking sugar-free and gluten-free. So, I've distracted myself.
Thinking about your Come Dine With Me trial. Yes. We were talking about completion.
Yes, okay, so programs. So, huge, ridiculously enormous percentage of the population watch these programs. So they're seeing chefs create things from scratch using good, fresh ingredients and so on. But do they actually do it themselves? Well, apparently not. It's like a sort of passive watching activity, and it's like people buy diet books or look about, you know, or say, I'm really into paleo and things like that, but then they don't actually do it. You see what they're actually eating, so but they're not. So they're sticking with their old patterns, their old habits, and not actually taking that last step to complete and finish.
So that's interesting, because I have to say, there's a slightly different take on that. I welcome those programs on hoarding and decluttering, because they have done a lot to, although I don't watch many of them, and actually when I watch them I find them quite stigmatising, and they can often be a bit sort of pointy fingery. My clients tell me that they make them feel, they reduce the stigma. You know, you watch that program, like, it isn't just because clutter is, there's so much shame associated with clutter. The people who've got themselves really overwhelmed, they don't want people to see their homes, they don't want people to know. And we tend to feel like we're the only ones in that situation, because we're not talking about to other people about it. So when we see the programs, we get that sense of, it's not just me, like, I'm not the only one suffering with this, and there is help out there. You know, they see people getting help, and it's like, there's help out there, we can get support. So actually, although often when I don't watch the programs because I find them quite annoying, I think they are doing quite a lot of good, because they're raising awareness, they're reducing stigma, they're showing people that there's a solution, that it's possible to kind of get yourself out of this situation. So that's a slightly different take on that. I don't know how that
well, it's interesting that the parallel between that and the eating psychology as well is that often the decluttering, or in some cases the overeating or disordered eating, is triggered by an emotional experience, like a loss, could be a death or a breakup, or that some life event has occurred which has cause the behaviour that you're finding problematic to go too much, and then it develops into a habit. So acquiring more stuff, eating more food, it just becomes a habit, and you're doing it without even thinking about it. So sometimes you do need an intervention to just sort of go, right, no, that's, because it's not actually what you want to do anymore. Yeah. It's become a very unhelpful habit.
Yeah. You're absolutely right about, I think, both disordered eating and acquiring too much stuff and not letting go of enough stuff. They're both coping mechanisms, aren't they? They're both things that we developed in response to some kind of upset or trauma, and it was a sensible thing to do. We needed some kind of coping mechanism at the time.
Yes.
And so it's like there's nothing wrong in having developed that. And if it's not serving you now, it's time to look at how you can shift it.
Let it go. Absolutely. So
let it go.
Yeah. It's like people need to take that little stage where you sit and think, okay, what's not serving me anymore? But we have such full lives, people's lives, and whereas we used to maybe have 20 minutes of quiet while we were waiting for a bus or whatever we're doing now, what we're doing now? We're getting this out, and it's like, so we don't have those moments of quiet reflection anymore because it's all filled up. So, that's where this scary word meditation comes in. People go, meditate. You don't have to meditate. You just need to sit quietly and just let yourself be
peaceful. Or just take those opportunities. You don't have to I'm going to sit quietly for 10 minutes now. But like you say, while you're waiting for the bus, resist the impulse to get the phone out. Just take a moment to sit and get aware of your surroundings.
That's right. And just be, there's mindful, and aware, and just,
And yes, if you're living in a very disordered, cluttered place, that's quite hard to do because you take your moment to sit and there's unfinished tasks and things in the wrong place, kind of shouting at you all around the room. It's very distracting, very hard to think clearly and be creative and just be centred in a state that's very disorderly.
And again, with food, how can you think about eating healthy if you're surrounded with a kitchen just full of awful stuff?
Yeah, of course. Tempted to reach.
Yeah, and what's about food is that we've got a society that is condoning awful food. The food industry has been pushing and advertising so well products that really are not serving us well.
Yeah.
So things like fizzy drinks, sugary fizzy drinks, we know now do our bodies a lot of harm. But it's become normalised. So it's quite a normal thing to have someone, have a fizzy drink, or you go to someone and there's cake and biscuits, or you have a business meeting and there's a plate of biscuits there. Yeah. The food industry have very cleverly normalised it. It never used to be the case. No. When I was a child growing up, snacking between meals was you didn't do it. It wasn't a thing. And now it's like the food companies have bigged it up so much. It's almost like people snack more than they actually have the meal, whatever snacking means. And kids talking about where's my snack. So it's like we have to denormalise that, and it can be very, very hard to stand up to your peers with, go on, have a piece of cake, go on, have a piece of cake. If you say no, they go, oh, aren't you being good?
And I think there's a tendency to want, I'm trying to articulating this, but we want our friends to enjoy themselves. So I'm making a parallel there with someone, say I was in a shop and I'm like, this happened to me just last weekend. I was in a second-hand shop and I found a dress I quite liked. But I'd only gone in there to accompany a friend. I don't need another dress. So I was saying, what, it is lovely and I look really nice in it and I really like it, but I don't need another dress. So my friend isn't going to say, don't buy it. They're just not going to say that. They're going to say, oh, go on, treat yourself. Yeah. Because and there is a tendency to want to do that. It's like it feels nicer to say to somebody, oh, you don't have to worry about what you're eating. You look great. That piece of cake. Yeah. Rather than go, you're absolutely right. Don't eat it. It's almost like you're agreeing with them that they're fat or something if you say don't eat it.
But I think the point, to drive that point even further, is that you can get to a state where you don't even, I don't buy cake, I don't have cake in the house, I don't want cake, I really, really don't. But then there's some social situations where if I just say I don't want it, which is absolutely genuine, then it's almost like I'm bullied into trying to pretend I like cake. So, for instance, here we are sitting down to make this video. And I said, well, let's have some tea. So we've got the teacups. We're in my back garden here. And I said, should I put the plate of biscuits out? I don't have biscuits in the house. I don't want biscuits. You don't want biscuits. But there was something about, to make us look normal for everyone, you should put a plate of biscuits there. So, oh, hang on a minute, I'm an eating psychology coach. What on earth do I want to put this weird plate of biscuits there for?
Yeah.
You know, and then I said, oh, maybe a bowl of cherries. No, you don't have to have food while you're doing something else. You eat,
and I think that's, so I don't know if I'm just making this parallel up, but I have a water bottle, a metal water bottle that has been to every continent in the world with me and comes to the gym with me several times a week and is really battered looking. It was originally red and it's still got bits of red paint on it, but it's all kind of battered. It's perfectly functional. The number of times somebody will say to me, "Well, when are you going to replace that?" And I say, "No, not. It works absolutely fine. Why would I replace it? It's completely fine."
Yeah.
But there's a kind of expectation that if something doesn't look perfect anymore, that you would go and replace it. Whereas, because I come from a very eco perspective, I'm like, if it works, it's perfectly functional, why would I replace it? So I can hear a parallel there about living up to society's expectations. You know, having to have the new thing, having to have everything look perfect. And it's a water bottle, for goodness sake. What does it matter if it's a bit battered? You know?
Well, keeping in with your peer group is a survival strategy. You know, so when people start a new job, you know, and you go into a new workplace, you have a look round, you see what other people are wearing, and you start to make yourself fit in with that crowd. That's basic in-group, out-group stuff, isn't it?
And that's what turns into keeping up with the Joneses.
Exactly.
It's not just about status. I mean, it is about status, but it is also just about wanting to feel that you fit, that you're match your surroundings. And
to be a little bit different, to be a pioneer, to be the first, you have to be a little bit brave.
Does that make me a brave pioneer?
So, you know, if your colleagues are all, you know, oh, let's go out for a curry and a few drinks after work, fine occasionally. But if it's happening pretty much every evening and it's not what you want, then you have to say, well, actually, no, that isn't what I want. But you are braving people to look at you and go, ooh, get you, you know. You know, then that is your choice. You can make a bad choice and do it and do it every day if you want, but it's still it is a choice. It's really important to understand you have freedom of choice. That's what the problem is with diets. You know, that if people say, "Oh yeah, I'm on the whatever it is diet and it's brilliant and I'm losing weight and it's excellent." Now anyone can lose weight on a diet, but you know, actually keeping it off, you know, after a year, it's 90-something% of people are putting that weight back on and more because they've put themselves in this artificial prison. There's also a state, by the way, when you're dieting, you can get into this state called compliance, which means that you're following this other person. You've given your power away to this book or doctor, whatever his name is, who's written the diet, and you've given all your power away to this person who says you can eat, you know, 4 ounces of this and you can eat a load of meat and no veg or whatever it is that they're saying to you, or vice versa. And you comply with it and comply, but at some point, somewhere down the line, you go to your burger. Do you know what? I'm gonna... And you break out of prison spectacularly and you go... Rah!
And so the parallel with clutter, the recidivism, when I work with somebody, a lot of the time, clients will say to me, I'm going to be really ruthless. Like, this time I'm going to be ruthless and I'm going to get rid of stuff. And they think I'm going to come in and say, get rid of that. Oh, come on, get rid of that. And that's so not what I do. Because if you force yourself to get rid of stuff that you're unsure whether you really want to or not, you will go back on yourself. You'll end up getting rid of stuff you regret. You won't want to do it again in the future because your experience of decluttering is losing things that are of value to you. The whole thing will be associated with negativity, and also you'll end up feeling that you want to replace it. That fear of scarcity will get triggered, and because you let go of a few things that actually turned out to matter to you, you'd go out and buy far more. It's the same thing if you're too rigid, if you're like, I've got to be ruthless, I've got to get rid of everything that I might have any doubts about, at some point you would just go out and replace it all and more. So yeah, you've got to be gentle with yourself.
I'm just wondering about the food equivalent of certain habits. So like when we were working together the other week, I think I showed you a book that had been a gift from my partner, and it was because I keep rabbits, and it was a jokey kids book about rabbits, and it had a picture of a now sadly deceased rabbit that I loved very much in the back of it, and so it was like a sentimental thing, but it was annoying me. It was like quite a fat book. It was a lovely gesture. But it's almost like a photograph of it.
Yeah.
I didn't need it, you know. So I brought it down and I put it in a bin bag. Then when my partner came into the kitchen, I picked it out of the bin bag and said, look, I'm throwing this away. And he went and did the fat lip thing. And I said, because it's a lovely gesture, really lovely, but it's... And he said, oh, yes, that's fine. So it was fine.
Do you know, that's brilliant that you did that, Sue. And that's so brave because like hanging on to gifts, because if you're guilty about it, that's a really big one. And I often talk to people about it, and I'll say things like, "With the person you noticed, you got rid of it, and if you gave somebody a gift and they didn't want it, do you want them to hold on to it? And could you possibly say, especially if somebody's got a perpetual gift giver in their life, so someone who's always giving them stuff, could you have a conversation with that person and say, look, I know you do it out of love and I really appreciate it, and I struggle with clutter, I don't want all this stuff. Would it be possible for you to express your love a different way?" And as a general rule, people find that very hard, and I understand it. It is quite hard. But how interesting that when you did it, actually you had that conversation. You were like, "Look, I got it. It was a really loving gesture, but it's done what it, it's served that purpose. It had its day. Is it okay?" After an initial moment of like, "Oh, he got it," and he's like, "Oh, it's okay."
And what was more about this is in the back it contained the image of a deceased loved one.
Yes.
It was a pet.
Yeah.
But again, so it was kind of getting rid of the concept that some sort of essence of that pet was contained in its image at the back of the book, which sounds quite, oh, for God's sake, But,
but that's like what I was saying about getting attached.
Yes.
Then you get attached
Yes,
to things.
it's
objects
nonsense.
and stuff.
Yes, it's like magic. It's like magic, So, it's sort of the voodoo there. Okay, so it's absolutely fine, and, you can say that it's all right with any picture. So I was just thinking about, in the relation, how that might be in relation to food and things people get attached to, which are attached to old memories or things. So
like the bananas, and the taste of bananas and plastic, because you used to have it as a child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or the apple pie that your mum used to make.
It has to be made the same way.
That's right, and you have to have it, Whereas in fact it's an attachment to an old memory, and yes, it's a sentimental thing, but you've still got that memory, and you can take a picture of the apple pie. You don't have to eat it.
And that's that you could be talking about clutter then, I use those words, and people say, "Oh, but this belongs to my mother, this belongs to my grandmother," and it's fine, keep it. I'm absolutely not saying get rid of it. However, it's just worth thinking about. Do you have other things to remind you of that person? Whether you keep that object or not, you will always have your memories. Would a photo suffice? Like, we ask those questions. Of course, if it still hurts to get rid of it, don't get rid of it. Like, that's always my bottom line.
Something I would always say, if you have gone to visit your grandma and she makes you her special apple pie and you're on a diet, do you or do you not have the apple pie? So I think at that point it's best to not think of that apple pie as food and think about it as what it is representing. So if for your grandmother making you that apple pie and putting it in front of you means love, eat it. That thing is pure love, and that is going to nourish you more than anything else. We're quite tearful when I say that, isn't it? So what you don't do is hurt and upset your grandmother. Go, "Oh, no, I'm on a diet." And what you don't do is go home feeling a failure. Just ate an apple pie, it has loads of sugar in it.
And what you can do is put strategies in place. So just as you can have the conversation with the person that's always giving you gifts, to say, as your birthday approaches, listen, just want to say, I know you're always so generous, and I know you do it out of love, and I'm trying to reduce the amount of stuff I have. So, you know what, you don't need to buy me a present this year, just come out for a drink with me. Or even if you do buy me a present, could it be an experience?
Buy me an experience. I bought a cooking lesson for my...
I was going to say with the grandmother, you could have the conversation well in advance and say, "Granny, I absolutely love your apple pie.
Yes.
And right now I'm on a diet.
Yes.
And you could not have it this time. Maybe another time in the future."
And if you've got a granny who's okay with that, that'll be fine. But some people don't. Some people, they've got parents and grandparents who are feeders.
That's true.
And it's very important for those people, if you've got a feeder in your life, they will feed you, and that's quite difficult.
It's really difficult.
They will refuse. They'll go, "No."
Same with the gift giving. So people will have will have conversations with the mum that always gives them stuff, and the mum won't go in. She'll keep doing it. And you have a right to, it's your own life. So it's not loving to give somebody or feed somebody something they've asked you not to give or feed them, and it's tough. And what I say to my clients, what I coach my clients around is, you have that. You're perfectly entitled to say to your mum, "Please stop giving me stuff." And it's her issue if she gets upset about that.
It is. You're absolutely right. And it can take a little while because people don't like change. So, but you can only change yourself. You can't change the other person. So if you're used to your mum just offloading her stuff on you all the time, or just giving you gifts of like random toiletries that you don't even like, you can say, "Actually, I don't want that." And the first time you do it is going to be dreadful because it'd be, "What? Oh, I've wasted my money then." And it'll be horrible. But after a while, she'll get used to it.
And do it lovingly.
Yes.
You know, like, do acknowledge the love
Yeah.
in it and explain to that person why you're doing it. It's not because you're rejecting them at all, it's about your own life. And really, if they absolutely can't get it, it's their issue, not yours.
But I think what you said earlier as well is show them what you would like instead. If they want to give you a gift, say, don't give me that object, but I'd love it if you organised or if the person gave me an experience or a lovely, you know,
just
a voucher for a manicure or whatever it is, or spend time. Time is such a valuable commodity in our lives, you know. So you can give someone a voucher. This is a voucher for an afternoon spent wherever you like, or this is a voucher for I will come and help you sort your wardrobe out. You know, can be done. Can be done. You know,
Speaking of which, shall we go back and sort? It's not your wardrobe, but should we go back and get cracking on with your home office again?
Oh, right then.
Come on, you know you love it. I just thought we could keep going on after.
Yeah, we could actually.
It's probably enough, isn't it?
It probably says quite a lot, but I think there's actually tons of stuff in there.
Yeah, we did.